the illusion of pirate freedom. They say the pirates were free men, kings without crowns, lords of the open sea. No masters, no nations, only wind, salt, and the promise of gold. But that's the illusion. Beneath the roar of cannons and the glitter of stolen treasure, pirate life was a world ruled by fear, hunger, and strict obedience. A ship was not just a vessel. It was a floating kingdom, and the captain its merciless ruler. Every man aboard, from the lowest deckhand to the first mate, lived by one truth: disobedience could mean death. When a young sailor signed his name, or made his shaky mark, on a pirate crew's roster, he imagined escape from the iron laws of the empire. No taxes, no navy, no orders from the crown, only brotherhood, rum, and adventure. But the sea had its own laws, and the pirate code, though born of rebellion, demanded loyalty sharper than any royal decree. Disobey an order in battle, you risked a whipping. Steal from the common loot, you faced mutilation. Plot against your captain, you'd be staring down a loaded pistol. Freedom, it turned out, came with chains, just invisible ones. Inside those creaking wooden walls, there was no escape. The decks stank of sweat and blood. Every man slept beside his musket and knife. Even laughter carried an edge, because any wrong word could bring punishment. Captains like Edward Lowe and Charles Vane ruled through terror. They were charming in calm seas, but in rage they became demons. Lowe once sliced off a crewman's lips, salted them, and forced him to eat them, all for disobedience. The ocean was vast, but for those men trapped aboard, it might as well have been a cell. Pirates called each other brother, but brotherhood had a cost. Every raid, every split of gold, every decision was bound by blood oaths and threats of punishment. The crew voted on their code, but once sworn, breaking it was unthinkable. If one man faltered, all suffered. And in a world where loyalty meant survival, punishment wasn't cruelty, it was control. The sea was merciless, and so were its sons. So when we imagine pirates, flags flying, laughter echoing over the waves, we forget the truth. Their world was not freedom, it was discipline, enforced with rope and steel. And those who dared to test that illusion would soon learn what pirate punishment truly meant. The code of the sea devils. They called it the Articles, a code written not by kings, but by killers. Every man who joined a pirate crew had to swear to it. Some signed with bold ink, others with blood. A silent vow that once you sailed under the black flag, your life belonged to the Brotherhood. The pirate code wasn't about freedom, it was about control. And it turned chaos into order. An order soaked in rum, sweat, and fear. Each crew wrote its own code, but the rules echoed the same dark rhythm. No stealing from the share. No fighting on board. No mercy to traitors. If you broke the code, punishment came swift, a whipping, a marooning, or worse. No priest, no pardon, no second chance, only the will of the captain and the cold eye of the sea. Legend says Bartholomew Roberts, the so-called gentleman pirate, ran his ship like a navy. His men dressed neatly, kept their muskets clean, and played music on Sundays. But if one man disobeyed an order in battle, he'd hang from the yardarm before the tide turned. Pirates were wild, yes, but they were never lawless. Unlike the navies of kings, pirate ships were their own republics. They voted for their captain and quartermaster and could vote them out just as fast. It was democracy with a knife at your throat. During raids, every man knew his share. Captains took 2, the surgeon 1.5, the rest divided among the crew. Even the crippled and wounded were given gold for lost limbs, because a man who gave blood for his brothers deserved silver in return. But the same men who voted for freedom also voted for vengeance. If you cheated the crew, you'd face them all. A circle of hard faces under torchlight, deciding whether you'd lose a finger or your life. Their justice was swift, brutal, and absolute.
A pirate captain was both king and servant. He commanded in battle, shouting orders through smoke and cannon fire. But in peace, he answered to his men. If he grew too cruel, they could overthrow him. If he showed weakness, they'd abandon him. Some captains ruled by charm, others by fear. Edward Lowe chose fear, carving obedience with his knife. Blackbeard, on the other hand, wrapped slow-burning fuses in his beard before battle. His face wreathed in smoke like a demon from hell, a living reminder of what defiance looked like. To serve such men was to live between awe and terror. When a new crew was formed, they gathered on deck beneath the flag, black as midnight, painted with death. The quartermaster read the articles aloud. "Every man shall keep his arms clean. Every man shall obey orders in battle. No lights after 8 bells. No woman shall be brought aboard." Then came the signing. Each sailor stepped forward, dipping a quill into ink, or blood, and made his mark on the parchment. Once the last name was written, the code was sealed with rum and the captain's oath. From that moment on, they were bound, not by law, but by the sea. The pirate code wasn't written by scholars or judges. It was carved from survival, a promise that even among thieves there was honor. It held the world's most violent men together long enough to become legends. And for those who broke it, the punishments were so cruel, even the sea turned its face away. The lash of the cat-o'-nine-tails. The sea had many punishments, but none struck fear deeper than the cat-o'-nine-tails, a whip made not of leather, but of terror. 9 knotted cords, each tip hardened with tar, sometimes braided with bits of bone or metal. It didn't just cut skin, it tore it apart. Every pirate knew the sound, that sharp hiss through the air, followed by the scream that drowned beneath the roar of the wind. The cat wasn't just a tool of pain, it was a warning, a promise that even the most ruthless brotherhood still had rules carved in flesh. The cat-o'-nine-tails was born long before the pirates, in the age of the Navy, when discipline was survival. But on a pirate ship, it became something worse. In the Navy, it was official, a cold ceremony under the flag of the king. On a pirate ship, it was personal. It was justice decided by men who drank, fought, and killed together, and now had to watch one of their own bleed. The cat was kept coiled in an oil-soaked chest, guarded like a relic. No man dared touch it without the captain's word, because once drawn, it demanded blood. When a man was sentenced, the deck became his gallows. The crew gathered, not out of cruelty, but duty. They had to witness what defiance cost. The quartermaster would tie the man's wrists to the mast. The sea wind would rip at his shirt, the ropes creaking with every breath. And then, silence.
except for the slow steps of the executioner. With each lash, the whip screamed, the flesh opened, salt bit into wounds, and the cries of pain mixed with the crash of waves. 10 lashes for theft, 20 for mutiny, more if the captain wanted a lesson that would never be forgotten. When it was done, someone would pour salt water or rum over the wounds, to clean them, or perhaps to make the man remember. No one walked away from the cat unchanged. The scars it left, long, crooked, and pale, were badges of shame and survival. They marked you as someone who had defied the brotherhood and lived to tell the tale. Some pirates bore them like trophies, others hid them beneath their shirts, haunted by the memory of that day. And sometimes the punishment wasn't meant to kill, but to break. A man whipped too many times would never stand straight again. He'd flinch at the crack of rope or the slap of sails in the wind. The cat lived on in his mind, long after the wounds had healed. The cat-o'-nine-tails wasn't just pain, it was control. It kept chaos from swallowing the ship whole. Because when gold was plenty and rum flowed free, rules could vanish like smoke. But the cat brought order back in blood. Every lash reminded the crew that the black flag might promise freedom, but freedom came at a price. A captain who failed to punish lost respect. A crew that refused to obey became mutineers, and in a world ruled by fear and sea, respect was the only law that mattered. So, when we imagine the pirate's whip cracking across the deck, remember, it wasn't cruelty for its own sake. It was survival, written in blood. The cat-o'-nine-tails was more than a weapon. It was the spine of pirate discipline, the silent law of the sea. For every lash that fell, another man learned what it truly meant to live under the black flag. The horror of marooning. The island of no return. The sea was merciless, but even she had nothing on pirate justice. When a man broke the Brotherhood's trust, stole from the loot, deserted his post, or betrayed his crew, they did not hang him. They left him. Far from any shore, the ship would slow in the heat of day. The condemned was rowed out on a longboat to a patch of sand that barely held a single tree, a jug of water, a pistol with one shot, and silence. That was all he'd be given. No judge, no gallows. Only the hiss of the tide and the knowledge that the sea would be the last voice he'd hear. Some said the ocean was kinder than a pirate's wrath. But for those marooned, death did not come quickly. Marooning was no wild act of cruelty. It was law, the ultimate sentence of the pirate code. The ship's articles, written by captains like Bartholomew Roberts and Blackbeard, spelled it clear. Any man found guilty of theft or mutiny shall be marooned with 1 pistol, 1 flask of powder, and 1 bottle of water. The idea was not to kill him instantly, but to make him feel the slow crawl of fate. The sun would bake the skin, the water would drain away. The mind, once filled with laughter and rum, would turn on itself, haunted by the sea's endless shimmer. Those who witnessed a marooning often said it changed them. The silence after the last oar stroke as the ship sailed away was unbearable. To be marooned was to be erased. You ceased to exist among the living, neither buried nor remembered. Pirates were men who lived and died by freedom, yet this punishment was the cruelest twist, to grant someone too much of it. The island became a mirror of the soul, empty, vast, hopeless. The victims would talk to waves, sing to stars, even beg passing ships that never came close. And when madness arrived, it came quietly, like the tide slipping back into the dark.
The pistol,
loaded with one shot, was not meant for hunting. It was mercy, for when the mind finally broke. One of the most haunting tales came from Edward England, a pirate captain known for rare compassion. When his crew mutinied, they spared his life, but marooned him on Mauritius with a few loyal men. He lived long enough to send a final letter saying, "Better the island's loneliness than the devil's company." Others weren't so lucky. Some were set adrift in open boats, forced to drink seawater, eyes burning with salt and sun. A few, by sheer chance or stubborn fate, were found by passing ships, their bodies starved, their minds gone. These men carried the scars of something worse than flogging or iron. They had faced eternity and heard it whisper back. Among pirates, the threat of marooning kept order where words failed. A single glance from the captain to the pistol was enough to silence any mutiny. Every sailor knew loyalty was not just about gold, it was survival. Even the cruelest captains feared it themselves. One wrong turn of luck, and the same crew that once cheered your name might one day row you to shore. It was the code's cruel balance, a reminder that freedom came with a price, and mercy was never promised. The whisper of the sands, when the waves whispered around those lonely islands, they carried stories of men who stared too long into their own souls. No plank, no gallows, no cannonball could haunt a man as deeply as the silence of being left behind. And as the sun sank over the endless blue, the sand held their final footprints, a warning to every pirate who ever thought he could outsmart the sea. The crackle of fire was the sound of judgment. When a pirate broke the code in ways no flogging could cure, betrayal, desertion, or cowardice, fire became the executioner's hand. But this was no hanging, this was branding. The guilty man was pinned to the mast, his chest bare, while the boatswain heated the iron in the galley's coals. The crew stood silent, their faces lit by the orange glow. When the iron hissed against flesh, it wasn't just pain. It was a mark that said, "Traitor." The branded would carry his crime forever. No escape, no forgiveness, no sea deep enough to drown that memory. Branding wasn't cruelty for cruelty's sake. It was law. Pirate codes borrowed from the old Royal Navy, where deserters were scorched with letters, D for desertion, M for mutiny. To the pirates, that mark was worse than death. It stripped a man of his brotherhood. Every tavern, every ship, every port in the Caribbean would see the scar and know he was a coward. Even if he escaped, the world itself was his jailer. Some captains, more ruthless still, burned symbols instead of letters, a skull, a cross, a serpent. To them the mark wasn't just punishment, it was a warning. Fire was prepared with a ritual calm. The boatswain cleaned the iron, the cook fanned the coals, and the captain read the charges. The condemned man rarely screamed, not out of bravery, but because no sound could carry through that kind of agony. The smell of burning flesh was unmistakable. The crew would turn their faces, not out of pity, but out of fear that next time it might be them. When the iron lifted, the wound would glow bright as gold for a heartbeat before blackening. That sight, that smell stayed with every man aboard for the rest of his life. Branding was not the only punishment. For the worst crimes, murder of a brother, treason, or striking the captain, bones were broken, piece by piece. Sometimes it was the arm that drew the blade, sometimes the leg that tried to flee. This wasn't madness, it was message. Each crack of bone under the hammer told the crew the code was sacred. The captain didn't rule by fear alone.
He ruled by balance. Every man had a right to vote, a share in the loot, but betrayal shattered more than bones. It shattered trust. Those who survived were changed men. The branded became drifters, outcasts who couldn't join another crew nor show their faces in port. They hid their scars under rags or carved over them with knives, trying to erase the symbol. But the mark never truly faded. Under moonlight, when sweat glistened on skin, the burn would shine faintly, like an ember that refused to die. Some said they could still smell the iron when they dreamed, and wake screaming to the sound of waves against the hull. The price of betrayal. For pirates, pain was not just punishment, it was memory. Every lash, every burn, every broken bone whispered one truth: freedom has a cost. And as the branded men vanished into the corners of history, their scars spoke louder than any flag. Because on a pirate ship, loyalty was carved in blood and sealed in fire. The night of judgment. The sea was quiet that night. No wind, no laughter. Only the groan of wood and the soft clink of chains. When a pirate crew gathered for judgment, it wasn't in a court. It was under the stars, with rum for truth and steel for law. The condemned was brought forward, wrists bound, eyes hollow from sleepless fear. Lanterns swung like ghosts over their faces. In the center stood the captain, not as ruler, but as witness. For here, the crew decided a man's fate. This was the trial of blood and rum, where brotherhood could turn to vengeance in a single vote. They called it the Circle. Every man aboard, from powder boy to quartermaster, would stand shoulder to shoulder, forming a ring around the accused. No man could hide, no man could refuse to speak. A bottle of rum passed from hand to hand. Each sip was a vow to tell truth, to stand by the code. When the bottle reached the captain, silence fell, and he would say, "Let the sea judge him if we cannot." It was democracy at the edge of a knife. A man's life hung on the nods of those he once called brothers. The quartermaster, keeper of order, would step forward. He spoke not with rage, but with the coldness of a man repeating the inevitable. Guilty of theft from the chest, guilty of breaking the code, guilty of betrayal. The crew would listen in silence, the only sound the slow slap of waves against the hull. Sometimes the accused would plead, swear innocence, or curse the captain himself, but pirates believed the sea revealed truth in strange ways, and soon the rum spoke louder than reason. When the accusations ended, the bottle returned. Each man took a final sip and dropped a small token into a wooden chest, a seashell for mercy, a bullet for death. The chest was closed, shaken once, and opened before the crew. When bullets outnumbered shells, there was no appeal. The captain gave a single nod, and the punishment was decided: a lash, a mark, or a marooning. It was justice without walls or priests, yet somehow every man aboard accepted it, for they all knew, someday, they might be the ones standing in the circle. The captain carried more than authority. He carried ghosts. Every punishment weighed on his soul like ballast on the hull. He had seen men break bones and men break faith, and somehow the latter always hurt more. Some captains drank their guilt away. Others prayed to a god they hadn't spoken to in years. But the sea didn't forgive.
She remembered every scream, every lash, every spark that rose from the iron. And when the ship sailed quiet again, the captain often stood alone at the bow, watching the water swallow another secret. In the world of pirates, justice was as wild as the wind, born from survival, sharpened by fear, and carried out with brutal honesty. They lived by the code because it was the only thing that kept the chaos at bay. No courts, no kings, just men, rum, and the sea. And though centuries have passed, the sound of that judgment still lingers in the waves, the whisper of a bottle passed in silence, the clink of a bullet in a chest, and the final voice that says, "Let the sea decide." The sea had gone quiet that morning, not from peace, but from shame. The black flag no longer fluttered, its edges torn and soaked in salt. The ship, once roaring with laughter and song, drifted like a ghost toward port. And below deck, the condemned pirates waited, wrists bound, heads bowed. Their crimes were the same that once made them legends, now they made them prey. As dawn broke over the Caribbean, the gallows stood ready, a timbered frame against the sky, waiting for men who had danced with death too long. The sound of chains echoed louder than the waves. Each man was led through streets lined with silence. Merchants peering from windows, soldiers flanking every side. Once, these pirates were the kings of their own law. Now, their feet dragged through mud toward a law they could not escape. Some smiled even then. One man spat at the ground and muttered, "Better this rope than a coward's life." Another hummed a sea shanty, the same one he sang when the cannons first roared years ago. But most just stared at the horizon. The same horizon they had chased all their lives, now forever out of reach. The gallows creaked in the morning breeze. Children climbed onto barrels to see. Ministers whispered prayers. The governor's men stood in neat rows, muskets gleaming. And the condemned stood beneath the beam, their shadows long and trembling. One by one the charges were read aloud. Mutiny, robbery, murder, treason upon the king's seas. Each name, each word struck like a hammer. But the pirates did not flinch. One even laughed when his name was called, a defiant grin under the noose. He shouted, "Tell His Majesty we were free men once!" And the crowd gasped, some in horror, others in hidden envy. When it was the captain's turn, silence fell over the dockyard. His beard was gray, his eyes bright as ever. He spoke with the calm of a man who had already made peace with death. "You can hang my body," he said, "but the sea remembers her own." He looked to his crew, to the men who had stolen, fought, and bled beside him. Each nodded once, like sailors acknowledging the tide. And in that moment, the gallows felt less like a sentence and more like a farewell. The captain's final request was granted, his boots left on, so he could meet the ocean like a sailor. The rope tightened. A drum rolled once. Then, silence. The trapdoor fell, and the crowd recoiled. Seagulls scattered from the rooftops, their cries lost in the wind. And as the bodies swung, the morning sun rose higher, casting long, swaying shadows across the harbor stones. But there was no joy, no triumph in the air, only the weight of an ending. For every man who watched that day, something in them knew these pirates had lived free in a world built on chains. The sea never forgets. By nightfall, the gallows were empty. The ropes swayed gently in the wind, and the tide crept closer, as if the sea itself came to reclaim her lost sons. The ship that had brought them to shore now drifted out again, crewless, silent, sails tattered. But if you listen, sailors say, you can still hear the whispers on the wind. Laughter, faint and fading, rolling over the waves, the ghosts of men who refuse to bow. Because the gallows may take the body, but the sea keeps the soul. Not every pirate met the gallows. Some met a different kind of death. Slower, quieter, crueler. It was called marooning, a punishment not by rope or blade, but by the endless sea itself. A man left alone on a barren island with nothing but a pistol, a bottle of water, and the mercy of the sun. No trial, no farewell, just silence, and the tide creeping closer every day. The ship would anchor far enough that no cry could reach it. The condemned would be rowed ashore, wrists bound, blindfolded, and left beside a single palm tree, a cruel symbol of life where none truly existed. When the rowboat turned back to sea, he'd hear the oars fade, and then nothing. Days would pass. The sun would peel skin. The wind would whisper songs of his old crew. At night, he'd watch the stars, the same stars that once guided him to treasure and battle, now nothing but cold witnesses to his slow undoing. They said the mind goes first. Some talked to the waves until their voice broke. Some carved messages into driftwood, hoping some ship, any ship, would find them. And some walked into the tide themselves, pistol in hand, choosing the sea over starvation. But the cruelest part was hope. Every sunrise promised rescue that never came. Every breeze sounded like a sail that wasn't there. There were few survivors of marooning, but those who lived spoke of strange peace in their final days, the sound of waves softening like forgiveness, the memory of the deck and the brotherhood fading like dreams. One man carved a final message into the sand before the tide erased it. The sea gave me life, and now she takes it back. When his shipmates later found the island, only his boots remained, pointed toward the horizon. And so the sea took them all, by rope, by lash, by flame, or by silence. No law could tame the men who called her home. No king could bind the waves that carried them. Their stories became whispers in the wind. Their bones became salt and coral beneath the tide. But still, when the moon hangs low and the wind carries that faint scent of gunpowder and rum, some say you can hear the faintest laughter out at sea. The laughter of men who dared to live free, even when freedom cost everything. Because the gallows end a life, but the sea never forgets.